Hey everyone, Cary Kolat here on Ask Kolat, presented by RUDIS. I always get this question all the time. I'm sure other guys who have done things that I've done in the sport wrestling guild. Who's the toughest guy that you ever compete against? And that's hard. You've done so much competing over so many years, like I have. It's hard to just go down to one guy. But when I go through it, there is a guy that comes to mind, and in terms of what he made me do in my career and the changes that he made for me mentally, and it brings me down to a subject matter like a strategy I call chunking. Chunking things together and breaking them up into segments. Which is back to the mental side of wrestling, and probably every single talk that I give on these episodes, it always comes back to the mental side. You know what? This caused this, which this is how I did it. And so the toughest guy that I would say that really changed my wrestling, and that's how I look at it. He changed my wrestling, was Tedeev from Ukraine. And Tedeev was, I think he was a three-time world champion, Olympic champion. Tedeev and I wrestled 3 times against each other. But he really brought a tactic that I used in training that you probably use now, and we use it in a lot of different things, and I just term it as chunking things. An example would be 100 push-ups. I don't know how many people out there, and if you're watching this, ask yourself, if we said do 100 push-ups right now, would you count 1 to 100 all the way through? Or would you break it up and do sets of 20? Would you break it up into sets of 20? Would you break it up into 4 sets of 25? Would you break it up into 2 sets of 50? Or would you do 10 tens? And that's typically, if you think about it, you probably do it right now. If I could do 100 push-ups, I don't count 1 to 100. I might do 1 to 50, and then I do 2 sets of 25 to finish it out. And mentally, what that does is it gives you point A and point B. It gives you these finish lines in the process of doing that set of 100 push-ups. A practice session is the same thing. You start practice, and most guys, if you're a coach and you're watching this, how many times have you seen your team where they start here in the practice, and then the practice starts to dip, and then when they know they're about done, you get into the sprint section, they start to come back up. It's because they can see the finish line. If you ever went into a practice and you ever really communicated with your team and said, this is how we're going to warm up, this is how we're going to drill, this is where the live part's going to come, and this is going to be the conditioning. This segment's going to be 20 minutes. This one's going to be 15. If you notice, guys they'll give you a better practice for the most part because they can see the finish line in each segment, and they also know exactly when it's going to be done. It's the same as going in there when you say practice is going to be 1 hour, including the warm up. You'll see a whole different type of training from your guys. And what the very best guys can do is you don't have to tell them where the finish line is. They create finish lines in their mind all the way through the practice. Okay, I'm not going to give up until this point. Okay, well, I got there, so I'm not going to give up until this point. A good example is I have a buddy of mine. He was a Navy SEAL, and he said, Cary, everybody's always hung up on Hell Week. And he goes, Hell Week is not really the hard part. What Hell Week does is eliminate the week right away because they don't want to train somebody for 5 months and then have the guy quit. It's a lot of wasted time. So Hell Week comes early in the process of becoming a SEAL, and they do that just to get rid of the weaklings right away, mentally. And he said, when you're in Hell Week, he says, what I would do is I would say, okay, I'm not going to ring the bell and quit until I get the lunch. And he said, then you would get the lunch, and he says, okay, well, I'm at lunch, so then I'm not going to ring the bell before dinner. And what he was doing is he was breaking each day up. And he said eventually you break the day into segments, and then you start breaking them the hours, and then you get to minutes. When I wrestled Tedeev, it was 1998 for the bronze medal match in Tehran, Iran. And, things didn't go my way in the Worlds. I had a protested match where I beat the Bulgarian, and, they protested, and they pulled me out of the match and pulled me out of the winner's bracket and just put me in consies. And so he went on to win the gold medal. I had to face a few world champions in the process of wrestling on the backside. And to finish this event, I had to wrestle Tedeev at altitude in Tehran. And I don't know what happened. I was an in shape guy. Like I was in shape, and I trained, I lifted, I did everything you need to do. I was in shape, plain and simple. Tedeev was not your typical European at the time. These were 1 5-minute bouts. You had to have 3 points scored by somebody in 5 minutes. If not, you had to go to another 3-minute segment. So you were an 8-minute match max. And This guy wrestled. I mean, he snapped and pulled on you and shot from every level and all angles the entire time. He wasn't a typical European, we always said. And I don't know what happened, but sometimes your body's not right. I did a show earlier where we talked about injuries, and things weren't right. Just absolutely not right. I fatigued in probably the first 2.5 minutes. And all I could do to get through that match was compete against myself the entire time. And what I would say to myself is, Cary, don't fall over for the next 20 seconds. And when I get through that 20 seconds, I would say, okay, just stay on your feet for another 20 seconds. I literally had to chunk that match all the way through. And to make it worse, not only was I not feeling right, I was just fatiguing early, and I don't know why. I was wrestling one of the toughest sons of guns in the world at the time. And, so this guy was coming at me, just putting me through all sorts of hell in the course of this 8-minute match. And long story short, I got through it. I'll post a link, for you guys to go and watch the match if you want. But to get through that, I had to chunk it all the way through. I had to take that time of 8 minutes and wrestle it to a point where I was wrestling in 1-minute segments, and then the 1-minute segments got to 30-second segments before it was like 20s. I mean, and it was just a fight to stay on my feet the whole time. And so when you ask that question, who's the toughest guy I ever wrestled? Tedeev. He made me go to a new level of mental toughness in terms of when things aren't right, being able to stay with it and stay focused and not listen to all the demons of fatigue that come in your head when you're competing. But it also brings me to the subject matter of your training in terms of chunking things. So when I trained, I always chunked them into segments. Okay, the warm-up, I didn't think about the sections that were coming after. I was only involved mentally in the warm-up. And then I would give myself a water break, and then I'd come back to the drill section. And the drill section would be chunked into mental segments, whether they be 4-minute or 5-minute goes, where I was going at a high pace, and I'd say, okay, I'll give myself a 30-second bounce break, and then I'll chunk it again for another 4 minutes. And then the live was the same way. And almost anything you do in life, you probably chunk it. Right now, if you take a long car ride and it's 6 hours, what do you try to? You try to not to make that first stop for the 3-hour mark, just to bust the ride up. We do it all the time. But it's a really good strategy for training. It's a really good strategy for competing. And it was something that I really learned to do when I wrestled Tedeev in those bouts to take bronze in 98. And that's the only way I got through that bout, was just a strategy that I always used my whole life. So anyway, keep the questions coming. Again, therudis.com. You can fire your questions there, or kolat.com, and I'll respond to them. Thanks.